John. Good morning and good afternoon to all of you. I'd like to start by thanking the GloFouling project team and the GloFouling project partners for the opportunity to present. It's an honor to be part of this project. The aim of this presentation is to provide some information on what is being done in the Galapagos Marine Reserve regarding bioinvasions and the importance of working together to limit the introduction of invasive species. So just to start off with, the Galapagos Marine Reserve is located in the Eastern Tropical Pacific, 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador. It's the largest marine protected area in the region and one of the largest in the world. It was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1978. And it has this region has several MPAs, including the Cocos Island National Park that belongs to Costa Rica, the Gorgona and Malpelo National Parks belonging to Colombia, and the Coiba National Park belonging to Panama. So the biophysical environment of the Eastern Tropical Pacific is unique. The confluence of warm and cold currents allow the unique biological community to exist, making it one of the most productive tropical oceans in the world. The Galapagos is influenced by several currents. We have the Peru Oceanic Current, also known as the Humboldt Current, that brings cold waters from Chile and Peru, the Panama Current that brings warm waters from Panama, the South Equatorial Current that pushes these currents towards the islands, changing intensity depending on the time of the year, and finally the Equatorial Undercurrent, or also known as the Crownwell Current, that brings the cold, deep water, nutrient-rich water to the western side of the archipelago. Because of these currents, you can find fur seals, kelps, corals, tropical fish, red-footed boobies, etc., making it a field laboratory and a very interesting place. Unfortunately, similar to other places in the world, the sustainability of Galapagos is under threat due to climate variability through El Niño, climate change, illegal unreported fishing, pollution, increase in marine traffic, and introduced species. In 2019, over 270,000 tourists visited the islands. However, as you all know, because of COVID, there was only 72,000 tourists that arrived to the islands, meaning that there was also fewer boats arriving. However, the population of the islands continues to increase. About 30,000 people live on the inhabited islands, which means that there is a continuous need for goods to arrive from mainland Ecuador. This means as tourism and population increases, the marine traffic visiting the islands increases, and with it, the risk of introduced species. So as I mentioned before, the Galapagos are in the middle of the Pacific. The Galapagos are geographically isolated. This isolation limits immigration of new species, allowing established species to evolve with few competitors or predators. Invasive species in isolated ecosystems can be the leading cause of species extinction. There are several anthropogenic vectors that can aid in the introduction of non-native species to the Galapagos. I'll mention a few here. There's marine traffic, there's canals like the Panama Canal. Aquaculture is not a problem here in the Galapagos, but it is permitted on the coast of Ecuador. Similarly with aquariums, they're not permitted in the Galapagos, but they are on the mainland. And we have the problem of marine debris, which is a problem worldwide nowadays. Additionally, there are natural vectors like currents, migratory species, climate events, and global warming that can help in the dispersal of these species. Today, we're going to focus on marine traffic and biofouling as an increase in risk for the introduction of species to the Galapagos. As many of you will know, in the past, it was thought that the ballast water had the highest risk of species introduction. However, studies now show that biofouling has a higher risk. If you look at the map of South America there, you can see that there are several of the large ports that receive large ships from all over the world, with Panama being number 2 and 3, just after Brazil, and Guayaquil, which is the largest port of Ecuador, being number 7 on the list. In 2019, they inaugurated the new port of Pozorja near Guayaquil, which now has the capability of receiving post-Panamax boats to enter. So this increases the risk of species introduction from around the world. Now, if we look at the marine traffic of the Galapagos has nearly 500 years of maritime history. There's been pirates, whalers, scientific expeditions, etc., that have visited the islands over the years. These ships could have easily accumulated species on their way to Galapagos and introduced them. An example of this is the HMS Beagle, where Darwin traveled to Galapagos. This boat stopped 15 times in the Atlantic and in the Pacific, accumulating biofouling before reaching the Galapagos, if you see in this map here. Nowadays, the types of boats that enter the Galapagos are cargo ships, fishing boats, tugboats, navy boats, research boats, and tourist boats. If you look at the graph, you can see how marine traffic, both national and international, has steadily increased since 2013. And especially you can see the international travel. The graph only shows data up to June 2019, but 2019 was the highest year of international traffic in Galapagos. So in order to research what species could have been introduced by marine traffic, the Charles Darwin Foundation and the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center started working together, looking at biofouling communities and deploying settlement plates in different docks on the inhabited islands. We primarily focus on the fouling community on artificial habitats as a model system, especially because artificial habitats are hotspots for biological invasions around the world. This is a standardized protocol developed and used by the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center on both coasts of the United States, Panama, and other sites in the Atlantic. We have now also deployed, as you can see in the map, in Galapagos mainland, Ecuador, Manta, Salinas, and in Cocos Island and Gorgona. We're planning to deploy in the near future Malpelo and Coiba. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we've been delayed doing this. So this method has been very successful and has given us some interesting results. We can now report that there are 53 introduced species in Galapagos. 48 of the 53 are newly reported as introduced. 30 of these were discovered in the 2015 surveys. And these results basically indicate that the greatest reported increase in the number of recognized invasions for any tropical site in the world, because previously there was only 5 introduced species reported. Obviously the research continues and the list will unfortunately probably get larger. Here we can see some examples of some problematic species that are now found in Galapagos. There's a Acidia acediensis, a Mathia versicolata, for example. And you can see in the first collection date, some records are older records, which indicates that the 53 species that we have reported are not necessarily new introductions, but they could have been introduced in the past and were not correctly classified as introduced. Some species have been classed as native when they were actually introduced. If you consider the history of marine traffic that I mentioned earlier, it makes sense that many of these species could have been introduced in the past, and due to lack of research, they were not identified and or classified correctly. Another thing we have started to do is test for spillover of introduced species from artificial environments, such as docks and moorings, to natural environments. We have found so far that we have 23 out of the 53 species are found in sites around the archipelago. To do this, we conduct dive surveys around the archipelago using the subtidal ecological monitoring method, which involves laying out transects in quadrants to measure abundance, coverage, composition, and diversity of species of fish, macroinvertebrates, and especially sessiles. Additionally, we conduct directed searches for non-native species at these sites, and this has proven to be successful in finding these species. These are some of the examples that we've found so far. Now, if we talk about biosecurity, Galapagos is the only place in the region that has a biosecurity agency, the Agencia de Regulación y Control de la Bioseguridad y Cuarentena para Galápagos, known also as the Galapagos Biosecurity Agency in English, or ABG. is in charge of controlling, regulating, preventing, and reducing the risk of introduction, movement, and dispersal of non-native organisms that might threaten human health, the terrestrial and marine ecosystems, the integrity of the islands, and the conservation of biodiversity of the Galapagos. The Galapagos Biosecurity Agency is also responsible for conducting boat and hull inspections to all vessels that enter the main ports of the archipelago, be it national or international boats. If the vessel is found to have biofouling on the hull, they are asked to leave the marine reserve, clean the hull, and re-enter for re-inspection. Us and the Charles Darwin Foundation work alongside the Galapagos Biosecurity Agency and the Galapagos National Park, assisting with species identification, risk assessments, and early detection and rapid response protocols. If you look here in the middle of the slide, you can see an example. This is 5 Peruvian fishing boats that got caught illegally in the reserve. And when they got inspected, we got sent the samples, and as you can see in red, these are some non-native species that we identified. And one of the ones we identified was a problematic species, the Asian green mussel, Perna viridis. This is an indication of how interception due to the inspections that the ABG conduct works, and how it allows the authorities to conduct the appropriate control and management strategies to prevent the introduction of non-native species into the reserve. In 2019, we ran an international workshop on marine bioinvasions and biosecurity along the Eastern Tropical Pacific and the Southern Pacific. We had participants from the States all the way down to Chile, 10 countries, 13 science institutions, 25 government institutions, 5 NGOs, and 52 participants. And one of the great outcomes of this workshop was the creation of the Combina Network, the Coastal Ocean Marine Biosecurity International Network of the Americas. Within this network, what we aim to do is mobilize invasion science and management solutions that protect, empower, and sustain coastal communities. We know how marine invasions work. We also know how to prevent marine invasions, but the challenge is not only to advance biosecurity at a single location, but to implement a coordinated regional marine biosecurity approach across the countries. So it's extremely important to work together, and this is what we've started doing, especially with other MPAs in the region. And with this, I'd like to thank our partners for working on this great project, and obviously our donors that permit our research to be able to do it. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll take any questions.